He was hell-bent on creating the carnage and the damage that he did.
Today, authorities describe horrific scenes after a pickup truck plows into a crowd in New Orleans, killing 15 and injuring dozens more. Police question a man after a woman fell to her death from a high-rise building in Western Sydney. Australia's property market comes off the boil as prices drop for the first time in 2 years. And Nick Kyrgios and Novak Djokovic's double adventure comes to a crushing end at the Brisbane International. Hello, I'm Dan Borscher. This is ABC News Mornings, coming to you from the lands of the Gadigal people. At least 15 people have been killed and more than 35 injured in the US city of New Orleans after a man drove a vehicle at high speed into a crowd in the early hours of New Year's Day. Revellers were gathered in the city's French Quarter celebrating the turn of the year when the driver of a pickup truck ploughed into crowds in what's being treated as a terrorist attack. Scenes of the immediate aftermath show the trail of destruction. After the vehicle came to a stop, the man opened fire on police, injuring 2 officers. Police returned fire and killed the driver.
Hits the corner and comes barreling through people, throwing people like a movie scene, like real life, throwing people into the air, they falling under the car, all that. The guy ends up getting out and shooting people, like he had ARs and bombs and all that, man. But the aftermath was really what got me, like bodies all up and down the street, everybody screaming and hollering. You look down, you see somebody doing CPR, you look around, people crying on the floor, like brains matter all over the ground. And yeah, it really hurt me to see like one of my closest friends like that. So
The images we're bringing you now show the busy party area of Bourbon Street hours before the attack. At 3:15 in the morning, the vehicle drove around a barrier and onto a footpath. Local authorities say the man wanted to kill as many people as possible.
Last night, we had over 300 officers out here. And because of the intentional mindset of this perpetrator who went around our barricades in order to conduct this, he was hell-bent on creating the carnage and the damage that he did.
The FBI has named the suspected terrorist as Shamsuddin Jabbar. An Islamic State flag, weapons and a potential improvised explosive were all found in the pickup truck. Boarding Air Force One outgoing US President Joe Biden says he is angry.
I've contacted every agency in the federal government as well as the state. They're all coordinating to get to the bare facts. We know what the facts are.
What was your reaction when you heard what happened?
Well, the reaction was one of anger and frustration. Thank you.
For more, let's bring in reporter Fletcher Mackel from WDSU-TV in New Orleans. Good morning and thanks for joining us. I understand that you're very close to where this all unfolded. Fletcher, what's the latest?
I am very close, and I do apologize for holding my phone and doing the Zoom. It's been a very long day for a lot of us here. I was one of the first ones on the scene at Bourbon Street this morning. I'm still literally close to the scene. Amazingly, things in the French Quarter besides Bourbon Street are getting back to normal a little bit, but Bourbon Street is the heart of New Orleans, and to have something like this happen in the heart of our city on New Year's Eve when we're hosting the Sugar Bowl, which is a college football playoff game, one of the biggest tourist weeks of the year, was just horrific. We've covered violent crime here, sadly, in our city for years and years and years. We've covered crazy situations, but nothing quite like this. To hear domestic terror, to talk about homemade IEDs, to talk about ISIS possible connections. Those are things that, for a local television journalist and in a market like New Orleans, we see in war zones, in conflict zones. To be talking about these things in a regular U.S. city is almost unfathomable and something that many of us have never covered before.
And you mentioned, Fletcher, that you were one of the first journalists there on the scene. Can you talk me through what happened?
Yeah, so obviously we arrived after the driver plowed down Bourbon Street, the very early parts of the tragic scene that unfolded. I actually happened to be close to where law enforcement found the homemade IEDs. They also believe that the suspect, who is deceased now, planted and worked with other people to lay homemade IEDs throughout the French Quarter to potentially cause more damage and more harm and try to take more life. So I was there when they found those IEDs and hastily cleared the media out of the area, called the bomb squad in, and safely did a detonation on their own in the French Quarter to make sure that those devices didn't harm anyone and that nobody picked them up. But most of the people that we spoke with in the French Quarter, because realize New Orleans is a 24-hour city, there is no cap on drinking here. So on New Year's Eve, people are partying into the wee hours. People in certain parts of the French Quarter had no idea this had even happened, whereas just a few blocks away, you have tragedy that is unspeakable and people seeing things and living things that they will never be able to forget. So literally 1 block away, people had no idea this was happening, whereas 1 block over, we had 30 people injured and as many as 15 possibly killed because of what this person did with his car, and then in a firefight with police, which also injured other people. So again, traumatic, horrific. It's terrible that things like this happen. And there are still 3 people that the FBI is looking for right now to potentially link to this as well, associates that may have helped the person who was killed, and trying to keep people calm here, who are tourists and residents, has been a work in progress, trying to make sure everyone is still safe with potentially people that contributed to this still on the loose.
And Fletcher, you mentioned there about when the police found that IED. Were you there when you got when that evacuation happened? And if so, what was your reaction when you just realised what was happening?
Yeah, no, I was right there. It was on Bourbon Street in Orleans. That was the corner, Bourbon and Orleans, when a Louisiana State Police trooper found a suspicious device, a suspicious package, and then they immediately cleared everybody back. The media, there was already a perimeter, and they moved the perimeter back even further. So it startles you a little bit when they say IED. Again, we're talking about a major U.S. city, tourism. You don't think of IEDs going off in the heart of a tourism area in a major American city. So they cleared everybody back, and it was a little startling. Then they called the bomb squad. And about an hour after that, we heard fire in the hole, and then we heard an explosion. And this wasn't an explosion that would rattle windows or rattle buildings or shake buildings. It sounded more like a loud firecracker. And what we were told is it was law enforcement detonating them in a safe way themselves to make sure that they didn't get detonated inadvertently by anybody else. But yeah, it's uncomforting. It's something you don't deal with every day. And it's still kind of hard to wrap your head around that, again, that we're talking about somebody potentially linked to ISIS, domestic terrorism, that killed more than a dozen people and that planted IEDs throughout the French Quarter here in New Orleans. Again, those are things that I never thought I would probably cover as a journalist in New Orleans. But sadly, here we are as we start 2025.
Yeah, and in addition to what you've just mentioned, do we know anything more about Shamsuddin Jabbar?
No, information is coming in. We know that he lived in Texas. He was renting an Airbnb here in a neighborhood adjacent to the French Quarter. There's a large police presence there. There was a fire at that Airbnb that may be linked to this. Did he set it on fire? We're finding more and more out about him hour by hour, that he's former military, that he lived in Texas, one state over to Louisiana, that he had come to Louisiana. We're still trying to figure out, did he move to New Orleans or was he visiting? But he was staying at an Airbnb one neighborhood over from the French Quarter, and we are continuing to learn more about who he is and potentially why he did something as horrific as this.
Yeah, and that Airbnb will be central. I just wonder if you had a chance to speak to any witnesses when you arrived there soon after this happened.
Yeah, and that's the heartbreaking thing, is it was in the early morning hours, and people that were leaving bars and restaurants, because again, this is a huge tourist area and kind of the heartbeat of the city of New Orleans. People come here to experience our food, our architecture, our culture, our drinking, and our nightlife. So there were still people leaving at 4:30 in the morning, 4:45 in the morning when I arrived on the scene. And we met one woman who was crying, saying she was looking for her friends. She didn't know if they had gone back to the hotel after a long night of partying on New Year's Eve, or if they were tied into the horrific tragedy that we were covering there. So to see the angst in people and to see the uneasiness, that's something that's hard. That's real human emotion. And how do you comfort somebody when they're scared, wondering if their friends and loved ones are okay? So that was kind of the early, scene with people there wondering, are my friends okay? Are my family members okay? We were out partying in the French Quarter, and I can't find them now. Did their phone die? Did they go back to go to sleep? Or are they sadly part of the carnage that is in the French Quarter right now? And that's something that's hard to deal with.
Yeah, just harrowing. Fletcher Mackel from WDSU TV, thank you. We appreciate your time this morning, and do take care.
All right, thank you. Sorry again about the Zoom and the shakiness.
Not at all. Well, for more, let's bring in North America correspondent Carrington Clark, who's in Washington, D.C. Carrington, the FBI believe the driver of the truck wasn't the only person involved in this attack, and we've just heard that there are a number of other people that are likely being investigated.
Yeah, there's different reporting on that particular issue about whether or not they have now potentially been ruled out as being involved, but this is a very quick-moving investigation. Obviously, multi-agency, both the FBI, the FBI is leading the investigation, but you've got local law enforcement, as well as state law enforcement and federal agents all involved in this. It did appear that perhaps there were some leads suggesting that other people might have been involved, potentially in placing these homemade bombs, what they call improvised explosive devices, around the scene where this carnage took place on Bourbon Street in the French Quarter in New Orleans. But it is, at this point, hard to get a read of exactly how likely it is that people were involved in actually carrying out the attack. But the FBI has been very clear that they do believe there are accomplices in some capacity, whether or not that might be the planning or not. We had a briefing with a lot of the agents involved in this investigation a little earlier, and this is the way they phrased it when they spoke about the fact that they do believe others were involved.
We're aggressively running down all of the leads to identify the possible subject's associates. We're working to ensure that there is no further threat. We do not believe that Jabbar was solely responsible. We're aggressively running down every lead, including those of his known associates. That's why we need the public's help.
But the state of play at the moment is that they only have this one suspected terrorist, Shamsud Din Jabbar, who has been killed at the scene after being involved in that gunfight with police officers. But the investigations are not only occurring in Louisiana, in New Orleans, but also in Texas, where they believe he was most recently living. And they are trying to work through his backstory. He is an American military veteran, but more recently involved in real estate. And obviously, key evidence at this point is the flag of the Islamic State, that terrorist organization, as well as the homemade bombs that were both in the pickup truck, but also placed around New Orleans. At the moment, the police are saying there is no current threat to the public, but given that they do believe there are accomplices, obviously people are very concerned that the threat has not truly passed.
And Carrington, what sort of reaction have we seen from political leaders there in the US?
Well, we heard from President Joe Biden. He was asked a few questions when he was travelling between locations and said he was angry, and then said that he's continuing to be updated by law enforcement and his senior staff. The president-elect, Donald Trump, who will be taking over the reins of power in just a couple of weeks, was very quickly out with a statement on his social media platform, Truth Social, where he seemed to draw a direct line between immigration and this particular attack. Now, we wait to see. There were a huge amount of details in that post to social media, but we do know that obviously as president-elect, he's receiving regular updates as well. And Donald Trump, when he was in power, did put a ban on some majority Muslim countries. And it'll be interesting to see what he decides to do politically about this particular attack. We've also heard from lots of local politicians in New Orleans. On one hand, people are saying we shouldn't be pointing fingers and people should be working together. But we also did see evidence of differing opinions about how this should be framed and what the appropriate response should be.
Meanwhile, Carrington, the explosion of a Tesla electric truck in Las Vegas is being investigated as a potential act of terror. What do we know about that separate incident?
Yeah, so this was a Tesla Cybertruck that exploded at the Trump Hotel, Trump building in Las Vegas, so well away from New Orleans. It is at this point unclear whether or not there is a direct connection between them. However, we have heard from the CEO of Tesla, that's Elon Musk, who has also in recent times become a close confidant of Donald Trump. Now, he released to the platform X, previously called Twitter, a statement saying that he had confirmed that the explosion was caused by very large fireworks and/or a bomb carried in the bed of the rented Cybertruck and is unrelated to the vehicle itself. Now, interestingly, there is also the suggestion that that vehicle was also rented through the same company, Turo, that the pickup truck that was used in the suspected terror attack in New Orleans. And so they are working very quickly to see whether or not these two events are linked. At this point, the police have not confirmed that they believe there is a direct link, but they are investigating it as a potential terror attack. So that's one that we'll be watching over the coming hours.
Indeed, Carrington Clark there reporting from Washington, D.C.